Hey guys, tonight we step into the frostbitten hush of 1880s Iceland, where the sky hangs low like a tired wool blanket and the streets of Reykjavik are so quiet you can hear a puff of steam from your own nose. There are no horns honking, no neon signs blinking, just the crunch of your boots on volcanic gravel and the occasional startled squawk of a seabird you're pretty sure is giving you side-eye. You've just arrived on the cold edge of civilization, and little do you know, this island has a ghost problem. You might expect Viking tales or dragon-infested glaciers, but no. We're heading somewhere colder, weirder, and faintly smelling of dried fish and paraffin wax. Welcome to Reykjavik, circa 1886. Population small, weather miserable, and ghost hunters? Surprisingly well organized. Spiritualism, this peculiar cocktail of religion, performance, and whispered hope, is drifting into town with the winter fog. You're just in time to catch it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it where you are? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge off the dock with a satchel of stale rye bread and a letter of introduction that's already damp from sea spray. Reykjavik is barely more than a fishing village pretending to be a capital. But look closer. Behind the turf-roofed houses and fog-blurred windows, you'll notice flickers of candlelight and the muffled murmur of conversation. The town's most fashionable obsession? Ghosts. Specifically trying to talk to them. Inside a modest timber house that doubles as both tea house and printing press, you're introduced to a curious little circle of thinkers, scribblers, and wool-clad eccentrics. They're poets, students, frustrated fishermen turned amateur philosophers. They sip herbal tea steeped in tin mugs, fingers stained with ink and soot, and they lean in close as they tell you, the spirits have returned. You don't scream, that would be rude. Instead, you listen, sipping your tea that tastes vaguely of moss and regret. They speak of a surge in unexplained happenings, clattering noises in abandoned sheds, pale faces in barn windows, dreams that seem to bleed into waking life. Some even whisper of full conversations with the dead, though everyone looks at the floor when that comes up. You blink, wondering if maybe you just hallucinated the last week at sea. But no, they're serious. One man pulls out a leather-bound notebook, filled with spidery Icelandic script and what looks suspiciously like tally marks. He's keeping a record of ghost sightings. Of course he is. Here's the historical fact for your sleepy brain. Spiritualism had begun sweeping Europe by the mid-19th century, sparked by séances in America and embraced by bored Victorians looking for both entertainment and existential reassurance. It didn't take long for the trend to reach Iceland, though it got there by boat, at the speed of molasses in January. Icelanders, with their folkloric traditions of elves, hidden people, and revenants, were arguably more spiritually open than most. Historians still argue whether the Icelandic embrace of ghosts was truly part of the spiritualist movement, or simply an old habit in fancier clothing. In fact, the lines between folklore and imported seance culture were often blurry. Was the wailing woman by the lighthouse a spirit from beyond, or just a draugr, the traditional Icelandic revenant who liked to scream a lot and sit on people's chests? Either way, she was ruining people's sleep, including yours. Back in the parlor, one of the ghost enthusiasts tells you about his neighbor who speaks in tongues after dusk. Another swears the wind is trying to tell him secrets. You, reasonably, wonder whether the wind is just cold and judgmental. Someone else admits to seeing their dead grandmother at the window, but only after drinking too much fermented shark. This is the energy of 1880s Reykjavik, half freezing, half fever dream. The city is caught between rational Lutheranism and centuries of folklore-soaked suspicion. The result? A hotbed, or, let's be honest, lukewarm bed, of ghost talk. People aren't just afraid, they're curious. They want answers, and perhaps a little drama to break up the fish-drying routine. Out in the harbor, the fog rolls in the thicker, and someone nearby lets slip that there's a medium in town, a woman known only as the Listening One, who conducts seances for the price of a cured cod. You'll meet her later. For now, you're invited to attend a private gathering happening just after dark. Bring a scarf, someone says, and maybe a crucifix. You're not sure if they're joking. As you wrap your coat tighter and prepare to leave the flickering warmth of the tea house, one final voice pipes up. You should really meet Jonas. He's seen the ghost of his goat, twice. You pause. You think about your choices. Then you ask, was it a nice goat? There's a long silence. Not especially. You return after dark, because of course you do. That's when the spirits are strongest, or so they say. The wind is louder now, moaning between houses like it's been stood up by a date, and Reykjavik looks like a stage set for a very chilly ghost play. The tea house, now candlelit and unusually smoky, hums with excitement. You duck inside, brushing snow off your sleeves, and immediately get handed a cup of something hot and deeply herbal. It smells like hay, old shoes, and maybe a hint of regret. Delicious. Tonight is seance night. There's a circular table covered with a threadbare cloth, stained with wax, and who knows what. Around it, 6 people with serious expressions and mittens with holes in the thumbs. One is a poet, another a clerk. There's a widow who's lost 2 husbands to pneumonia and now claims one of them is still around, mostly to criticize her stew. Candles flicker. A gust of wind knocks on the shutters like an overly polite ghost. You sit down. Someone hands you a tallow candle. It sputters in protest, and then, with a theatrical flourish, the medium arrives. She's not what you expected. No shawl, no crystals, just an older woman with weathered hands, kind eyes, and an extremely direct voice. Don't move during the summoning, she warns, and don't laugh or the spirits will know. You try not to laugh immediately. The seance begins with the usual fare, holding hands, closing eyes, deep breaths that sound more like sighs of resignation. She mutters words in a mix of Icelandic and something older, maybe Old Norse, maybe just a dialect so rural it counts as spiritual. Here's a fun fact for your sleepy brain. Seances in 19th century Europe were rarely standardized. Mediums made things up as they went, sometimes genuinely believing, sometimes putting on a performance. In Iceland, seances blended traditional prayer, folklore rituals, and imported theatrics. Historians still argue whether Iceland's mediums were charlatans borrowing a trend or sincere mystics rooted in older folk traditions. Back at the table, the medium's voice changes. Not dramatically, no deep baritone or demonic hiss, just a subtle shift in cadence. She starts to speak as if responding to questions you didn't hear asked. He says he forgives you, she murmurs. He's cold. He wants his socks back. Someone sniffles. You try to piece together who he might be, but the candlelight makes everyone look equally haunted. The widow nods. Maybe that was for her. Maybe it was for the ghost goat guy. You really don't know anymore. Suddenly, the candle beside you flickers violently, and someone's chair creaks like it's being nudged. The medium shudders and mumbles, "He's here." At this point, you're thinking, statistically, this is just wind and cheap wood, but your feet are cold, your hands are colder. And that tea may have been 60% root extract and 40% suggestion. You start to feel something. A chill in your spine, a memory that's not yours, or just indigestion. The medium breaks the circle, eyes fluttering open. "He's gone now," she says softly. "He said thank you." The room is silent. Then the poet asks, "Did he say anything about the manuscript I lost?" The medium frowns. "He said it was boring." A titter of laughter breaks the tension. Even ghosts, it seems, have literary opinions. You linger after the seance, sipping the rest of your now cold tea and watching the candle wax pool like tiny ghost footprints. Someone leans over and says, "This is nothing. Last week she channeled a Viking." When you raise your eyebrows, they add, "He was extremely angry about furniture." You wonder whether this is just boredom in a country with long winters and no television. But it's more than that. There's sincerity here, even if it's laced with absurdity. These aren't Victorian parlor tricks for rich socialites. These are people trying to stay warm, stay sane, and stay connected to something bigger than the freezing reality outside. And besides, in a land where the sun forgets to rise half the year, a little ghostly companionship isn't the worst thing. As you step back outside, The snow crunches beneath your boots, and the night stretches endlessly in all directions. Reykjavik sleeps fitfully. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then regrets it. You glance over your shoulder, just once, and think you see a flicker of movement behind a frosted window, probably just your imagination. Or maybe an unpaid ancestor. Either way, your bed is calling. Just maybe check under it first. The next morning arrives like a slap from a damp mitten. The sun rises reluctantly, casting a pale, watery light over Reykjavik, like it's embarrassed to be seen. You stumble into a local bakery where the bread is tougher than most interpersonal relationships, and you chew reflectively while replaying last night's séance in your head. Was it real? Was it just atmospheric tea and suggestive candlelight? Either way, it's not over. Someone taps you on the shoulder. If you're really curious, he says, you should meet the Ghost Club. You follow him because apparently that's what you do now. Trail after strangers into snow-covered neighborhoods for ghost meetings. The building you're led to is a former fish smoking shed that now proudly serves as the headquarters of Reykjavik's one and only spiritualist society, the Ghost Club of Isafjordur. Despite the name, they're not from Isafjordur. One of the founders was, but the name sounded better than slightly drafty paranormal circle of Greater Reykjavik. You step inside, greeted by the smell of burnt coffee and wet wool. Around a small table are 4 men in sweaters that haven't changed since last winter, and a woman holding a notebook labeled Important Hauntings Volume 2. They take this seriously. The club was founded in 1882, just after a mysterious incident involving a levitating fishing rod and a spectral fish that slapped someone across the face. That story is hotly debated. Historians still argue whether it was a genuine haunting or the result of excessive cod consumption mixed with a strong draft. Today's agenda includes reviewing last week's paranormal survey, which mostly involves sheep acting suspicious and a barn door that won't stay shut. The group debates whether it's a ghost, bad hinges, or just Iceland being Iceland. You sip your burnt coffee and try to look scholarly. Then Jonas speaks up. Yes, that Jonas, the man whose goat is allegedly haunting his shed. It appeared again, he announces solemnly. Only this time, it brought friends. A murmur ripples through the group. Goat spirits, plural. Now this is getting serious. You listen as he describes the scene. 3 ghostly goats standing in the mist, unmoving, eyes glowing faintly. Someone suggests it was just real goats in fog. Jonas replies with the confident finality of a man who's had a long week. Real goats don't smell like lavender and judgment. You make a mental note to visit his farm later. The conversation turns to ethics. Yes, ethics. Can you exorcise a ghost that seems happy? Should you trap a spirit in a barn if it's not causing harm? One member suggests that maybe ghosts need therapy, not banishment. Another counters that if therapy worked, none of them would be here talking to dead people. Here's your mainstream historical nugget. Ghost clubs like this weren't unique to Iceland. Across Europe and North America in the 9th century, spiritualist groups formed with the aim of documenting, studying, and even proving the existence of spirits. They treated ghost hunting like a science. Iceland, ever quirky, combined this pseudoscience with its own rich storytelling traditions. The fringe tidbit: one member of the Isafjordur Ghost Club once claimed he could detect ghosts using only his nose. He described their smell as a mix between rain, boiled leather, and something that made his left eyebrow twitch. His nickname, not surprisingly, became Nefmador, the Nose Man. Back in the room, a vote is held to determine whether last week's candle spontaneously extinguishing should be counted as supernatural activity. After a 10-minute debate, they agree it qualifies, but only if the candle wasn't near the door. An older gentleman reads aloud from a guidebook on spirit communication. It's mostly theories and sketches, one of which depicts a ghost leaving a message in porridge. You don't ask. Someone suggests updating their tracking system. Currently, they use a wall map with tiny pins and string, except it's a painting of a sheep they thought looked mysteriously knowing. You ask where the ghost goat sightings are marked. Left haunch, they reply without irony. You're invited to join their next expedition, which involves hiking out to an abandoned turf house and letting the spirits come to you. The club strongly recommends bringing mittens, a thermos, and something to appease any particularly dramatic ghosts. Cheese apparently works best. Before you leave, you're handed a pamphlet titled Hauntings of the West Fjords, a friendly guide for the cold and curious. It's handwritten, slightly crumpled, and includes a poem in the back dedicated to a spirit named Snorri who kept misplacing his pants. You step out of the fish shed HQ into the freezing daylight, pamphlet in hand, and realize you've joined a ghost hunting society without even meaning to. You came to Reykjavik for quiet nights and maybe a puffin sighting. Instead, you're now affiliated with spectral livestock and candle politics. But hey, it beats fish gutting. You've now reached the part of your Icelandic ghost hunting adventure where things leave the tepid safety of Reykjavik and plunge into the icy, wind-scoured hinterlands. That's right, you're going rural. The kind of rural where your neighbors are glaciers. The only light source after 4 p.m. is your own paranoia, and the goats might be dead. Or worse, undead. The journey begins on horseback because, well, cars aren't really a thing yet, and walking 50 kilometers in sleet sounds like a Viking punishment. Your borrowed horse is named Floki, and he looks like he's seen things. He snorts dramatically every time you mention ghosts. Either he's deeply skeptical, or he's personally offended by your lack of woolen layers. By dusk, you and 2 ghost club members arrive at a farmstead that looks like it was cobbled together by half-asleep trolls. Turf roof? Check. Lopsided door? Absolutely. A goat skull hanging over the threshold for protection? You bet. The farmer, a wiry man with more beard than face, waves you inside and offers a stew that tastes mostly like boiled air and disappointment. He's the one who reported the first rural haunting in this region, a story that spread faster than fish soup at a church potluck. It began with a strange howling outside the barn every night. Not wind, not wolves, something else. Then the sheep started acting twitchy. Now, sheep aren't exactly paragons of calm wisdom, but these ones began refusing to enter certain pens, staring at empty corners and occasionally fainting, which is not ideal. You ask what the ghost looks like. The farmer shrugs. Mostly fog, he says, but angry. You nod solemnly, as though that clears everything up. The ghost club members unpack their investigation tools, a small notebook, a candle stub, and a goose feather. For spirit sensitivity, you ask if that last item has been tested. Tested, one replies. It tingled once. That counts. Here's your mainstream fact of the evening. Many Icelandic ghost stories from this period had deep roots in older folklore, especially tales of Afturgangar, the walking dead who returned to haunt the living, not out of malice necessarily, but out of unresolved business. Historians still argue whether these stories were purely metaphorical, ways of processing grief, or believed to be literal, physical threats to the living. And now, the quirky detail you didn't ask for, but are getting anyway. There was a recurring tale of a barn ghost named Boli, whose presence was marked by the unmistakable scent of pickled herring and a sudden urge to quote scripture. Boli allegedly once interrupted a wedding by setting off a chain reaction of panicked livestock stampedes. The couple remained unmarried. Back at the farmstead, you're led to the barn where the haunting supposedly peaks. The door creaks open, and your nostrils are immediately assaulted by the smell of wet hay, manure, and something sweeter. Not pleasant sweet, more like fermented despair. You resist the urge to gag and step inside. It's cold. It's dark. It's the kind of dark that seems thick enough to chew. The Ghost Club's unofficial leader, Christian, begins the ritual, lighting the stub of candle, placing it on an upturned bucket, and reading a passage from the Poetic Edda. This is not standard ghost hunting protocol, but in Iceland it seems vaguely appropriate. Then comes the waiting. Your breath fogs in the air. A beam of moonlight pierces a crack in the roof. Something shifts behind a haystack. You tell yourself it's a rat. A big, shaggy, four-legged rat. A low groan echoes from somewhere in the shadows. Christian leans forward. "Did you hear that?" he whispers. "That was not the wind." You, having heard approximately 1,000 varieties of Icelandic wind by now, agree. That was not the wind. That was either a ghost, or Floki trying to stage a dramatic escape. The farmer swears he's seen a shape here. Tall, thin, wearing what looked like a sodden cloak. It never speaks, only watches. You instinctively clutch your candle. It promptly goes out. Perfect. What follows is 30 minutes of staring into the darkness while various creaks, whispers, and distant sheep noises nearly give you cardiac arrest. At one point, the barn's back door swings open and then slams shut. You all freeze. Christian breathes. It's here. Everyone waits, but nothing more happens. Eventually, the farmer mutters, "It usually leaves by now." And it does, or at least it seems to. The barn settles. Your nerves don't. You step back into the frozen night, wondering if your toes will ever regain feeling. Christian declares the event a confirmed encounter with ambiguous phenomena, which in ghost hunting circles is basically a standing ovation. Back in the house, the farmer offers you more stew. You politely decline. You're too busy trying to figure out if that goat skull on the wall just winked at you. Spoiler, it didn't, probably. Tonight, you fall asleep in a loft filled with hay and questions. Mainly, why does every ghost smell like fish? You awaken to the sound of something snorting below your loft. You freeze, blanket clutched to your chin, eyes wide in the gray morning light filtering through a crack in the turf roof. Is it the ghost? A wayward sheep? Your own regret for joining an amateur ghost hunting expedition in sub-zero weather? Turns out it's just Floki. He's chewing on someone's mitten and eyeing you like you're the weird one. Fair enough. You pack up, scarf yourself to the point of immobility, and prepare to head deeper into the countryside. Today's destination? A village church, weather-beaten and clinging to the edge of a cliff like it's afraid of commitment. But this isn't just any old chapel. It's where the infamous Reverend Bjarni once staged a holy war against the undead. Icelandic edition. You arrive as snow begins to fall, gently but persistently, like the sky is trying to bury the whole story in fluff. The church is small, lopsided, and extremely haunted-looking in that charming postcard from the abyss kind of way. You're greeted by the local caretaker, who looks like he was born in a blizzard and has never forgiven it. He ushers you inside and immediately launches into the tale of Reverend Bjarni, the priest who would not stop exorcising things. Bjarni served in the mid-1800s, known more for his booming voice than his theological nuance. According to legend, he once exorcised an entire hillside after a cow refused to walk over it. No one asked him to. He just did it. With a bucket of holy water, a Bible, and an intense glare that allegedly made the ghost of a Viking warrior apologize for being a bit drafty. The story goes like this. One winter, strange occurrences began to plague the village. Windows shattered without cause, doors slammed in empty rooms, milk curdled unnaturally fast and not even in a helpful cheese-making way. People whispered of spirits, angry ones. But Bjarni, he didn't whisper. He bellowed. He began a campaign of spiritual cleansing. Every night, he walked the churchyard, muttering Latin, flicking holy water at shrubs, and occasionally slapping door frames, just in case. Historians still argue whether Bjarni's fervor was driven by genuine belief, latent boredom, or a competitive streak sparked by rumors of ghost activity in neighboring parishes. Mainstream fact time. The Lutheran Church in 19th century Iceland was deeply influential and occasionally conservative in its spiritual interpretations, but isolated clergy like Bjarni often held a hybrid view of the world, combining Christian doctrine with old superstitions still embedded in local culture. Ghosts? Unlikely in the scripture, but tell that to a cow that won't cross a fence line. Now for your fringe tidbit. One of Bjarni's rituals allegedly involved baking communion wafers infused with ghost-banishing herbs, which turned out to be a mix of angelica root and seaweed. Unsurprisingly, church attendance dipped slightly during this culinary phase. You walk through the church's nave, which creaks like it's sighing under the weight of untold stories. The pews are uneven. The air smells of old wood and extinguished candles. There's a trap door near the altar that the caretaker swears leads to a tunnel used to confuse ghosts. You choose not to ask further questions. As evening creeps in, you're invited to a recreation of one of Bjarni's rituals. For science, obviously. The caretaker dons a replica robe, fraying, slightly musty, but still weirdly imposing, and leads you around the graveyard, muttering psalms while swinging a censer made from an old kettle. You try to be respectful, but it's hard when your scarf keeps trying to strangle you in the wind. Then comes the exorcism finale, standing in a circle of stones and chanting a line from Psalm 91, traditionally believed to drive out evil. The wind howls. Your candle refuses to stay lit. Somewhere in the darkness, something groans. "Fox," says the caretaker flatly. "Probably." You sleep in the church's former storeroom that night, next to a bag of hymnals and what might be a mummified potato. You dream of loud priests and apologetic Viking ghosts. You wake up to silence. Mostly. There's a faint sound of humming. You check outside. The graveyard is still. The snow has softened everything, muffled it like cotton stuffed in the ears of time. You turn to head back in, and just for a moment, you swear you see movement behind a gravestone. A tall figure, cloaked, watching. You blink. Gone. It's probably fine. It's always probably fine. You leave the haunted church behind as the snow deepens and the wind whispers something you choose to interpret as good luck instead of turn back now. Your journey continues eastward, where the roads are less like roads and more like strongly implied paths across the frozen crust of the earth. By now you've developed a strange resilience. Your socks have given up, your thermos is 80% slush, and your ability to be startled by ghost goats has hit an all-time low. But nothing can prepare you for what comes next, the literary séance. You arrive at a modest homestead perched on a hill, where 3 chimney stacks puff like suspiciously coordinated ghosts, and a small group of intellectuals have gathered around a writing desk. You're greeted by Thorhildur, a soft-spoken school teacher with the posture of someone who's read too much Kierkegaard and not enough cozy novels. "We're trying automatic writing tonight," she says, handing you a blunt pencil and a blank sheet of paper. "You might receive something." You nod as though this is normal. It is not. Inside, the room is warmer than expected, with a crackling fire, too many books, and the faint smell of ink and sea salt. The group includes 2 aspiring poets, a retired fisherman who now translates Latin, and someone's aunt who claims to channel a deceased tax collector named Balder. The rules are simple. Hold the pencil gently, relax your hand, don't think, just let the spirit guide you. And thus begins one of the strangest hours of your life. Your hand begins to twitch. You write something. Slowly, clumsily. You peek. Boil the potatoes. He's watching the potatoes. Always. Okay, well, that's haunting in its own way. The school teacher reads her paper aloud. "The wind knows your name. Avoid the cupboard." Aunt Balder scribbles tax codes mixed with emotional outbursts. "Deduct the saltfish. She lied about the butter." The room nods solemnly. Here's your mainstream historical anchor. Automatic writing, also known as psychography, was a real phenomenon in 19th century spiritualist circles. Practitioners believed spirits could communicate through the unconscious hand of a living person, resulting in mysterious writings that often blended nonsense, poetry, and uncanny detail. Even notable figures like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle took this seriously. Historians still argue whether automatic writing was evidence of the supernatural, subconscious projection, or just people really wanting a ghost to finish their essays. Your quirky tidbit of the evening? One Icelandic woman in 1890 claimed to channel a spirit who exclusively wrote recipes for seafood stews. The spirit's name? Mrs. Gudrun, and she insisted on fresh dill. Back in the writing room, the fire pops loudly, making everyone jump. Thorhildur declares it a sign. Of what exactly is unclear. The poet across from you has entered a trance-like state and is scribbling feverishly. You sneak a peek and see, "I miss the sea. The dog was a mistake. Bury it next to the spoons." You resist the urge to ask questions. Someone knocks over a candle. The flame sputters. Shadows dance across the walls like interpretive theater gone slightly wrong. Aunt Balder begins humming a hymn with uncomfortably specific tempo. You try to stay calm. After all, what's a séance without at least one minor fire hazard? When the session ends, the room falls into that peculiar hush. Part reverence, part social awkwardness. Papers are gathered. Some are tucked away as sacred artifacts. Others are quietly burned in the hearth. You keep yours. You have a feeling it might come in handy next time someone forgets to watch the potatoes. As the group disperses, Thorhilder offers a final thought. Sometimes they're not trying to scare us. Sometimes they're just bored. You can't argue with that. If you were a ghost stuck watching potato stew for eternity, you'd probably scribble nonsense and mess with candles too. Outside, the cold bites like it's personal. The snow has stopped, but the wind is back, rattling the shutters and muttering Icelandic lullabies. You mount Floki, who has developed a sudden hatred of automatic writing, and make your way toward the next village. You pass an abandoned turf house, its roof sagging like a tired sigh. For a moment you see flickering candlelight in the window, but you blink, and it's gone. You're not sure whether to stop, investigate, or just keep moving. You keep moving. Good choice. You arrive in Akureyri a few days later. If Reykjavik is a sleepy fishing town, then Akureyri is its overachieving cousin, who owns a few more books and once met a Danish duke. It's still freezing, still fishy, and still very much haunted. But it has something Reykjavik does not: a university. Specifically, a university filled with people who think ghosts are worth arguing about. You shuffle through the creaky doors of a lecture hall that smells like wet mittens and chalk dust. It's sparsely populated. Half the students are homesick, probably with frostbite of the enthusiasm. But those who remain are furiously scribbling notes while a professor at the front paces like a caffeinated walrus. You sit down and quickly realize that today's topic is ghosts, more precisely, epistemological frameworks for evaluating spectral phenomena in post-Reformation Icelandic culture. That's fancy talk for, can goats see ghosts, and if so, do we trust them more than poets? The professor, a tall man with eyebrows like angry caterpillars, launches into a monologue about known ghost sightings in 19th century Iceland and whether they meet the criteria of shared subjective experience. You write this down, then you underline it, then you immediately lose interest and start doodling a haunted goat. Here's your historical fact for the day. By the late 1800s, Iceland had begun formalizing education and higher learning, with universities becoming places not only for theology and law, but also for folk culture and philosophy. Scholars recorded ghost stories, debated their origins, and occasionally gave them Latin names, which made them sound much fancier than they deserved. Historians still argue whether this intellectual attention elevated ghosts into the realm of cultural artifact, or simply gave bored academics an excuse to host wine-fueled séances in faculty lounges. As if to prove the point, one student stands up and reads a paper titled, "The Phenomenological Implications of a Non-Malevolent Revenant in Sheepfold Contexts." The room claps politely. You look around and realize you are, without trying, attending a ghost-themed academic conference. During the break, you sip on something that might be coffee and might be melted shoe polish and chat with a student named Elias who claims to be doing his thesis on the emotional intelligence of poltergeists. They're usually angry, he explains, but sometimes they're just disappointed, especially with furniture placement. You nod slowly. Elias invites you to his next observational study, which, he clarifies, is just 3 grad students sitting in a barn with a tape recorder and hoping something dramatic happens. Spoiler, it usually doesn't. Still, they try. Because this is Iceland, and when the nights are long and the wind keeps whispering names you've never spoken, even the skeptical start to wonder. The conversation turns to Type B hauntings, theories that some ghosts aren't people at all, but memory imprints, like a house remembering a scream, or a room that keeps having the same nightmare over and over. One professor believes this could explain why goats seem to freak out in the same exact corner of a certain dairy barn. You try not to laugh. You fail. As the lecture resumes, the professor displays a series of sketches made during alleged hauntings. They look like stick figures doing ballet. One has been labeled, possibly Aunt Gudrun. Another is just a vaguely angry swirl captioned, "Negative emotions during butter churning." Elias leans over and whispers, "That's the one that threw a ladle at a pastor." You leave the university with your brain slightly melted and your notebook full of phrases like spectral logic loops and residual angst energy. It's a far cry from the bump-in-the-night ghost stories you grew up with. These people aren't hunting ghosts, they're categorizing them. Still, Despite all the jargon, all the academic detachment, one thing is clear. Even the most rational minds here want the ghost to be real, or at least real enough to make all the reading worth it. As you walk through the snowy streets of Akureyri, you pass the university chapel. Its bell tolls, low and lonely. A light flickers in one of the upper windows. You stop. Just a student, you think. Just a candle. Just your own reflection, maybe, but just in case. You give it a little nod. Can't hurt. You know things are getting serious when the ghost hunters start importing equipment. That's right. It's no longer just feathers and muttering. Now there are devices, glowing boxes, dials, possibly cursed thermometers, and the people bringing them? British. You meet them at the docks. The boat from Edinburgh arrives with a groan, wheezing into harbor like it regrets ever leaving port. A group disembarks wearing thick wool coats, smug expressions, and the distinct look of people who have spent too much time trying to photograph the invisible. They are spiritualists, members of the London Society for the Scientific Study of Spectral Phenomena. They call it LSSSP, you call it a mouthful. They come bearing gifts, planchettes, spirit trumpets, and a particularly long scroll titled Proper Procedure for Engaging Polite Ghosts. You trail them to a local inn where they set up shop like paranormal aristocrats. One man, Reginald, is already complaining about the cold. Another, Mildred, insists that Icelandic ghosts are clearly more melancholy than their British counterparts and plans to write a paper about it. You've never seen so much lace and brass in one room. The Icelandic Ghost Club members are torn. On one hand, the British have come with gadgets. On the other, they've also brought opinions, loud ones. A meeting is called in the tea parlor, which now doubles as International Ghost HQ, and you watch the awkward merging of two very different ghost philosophies. The Brits pull out a vibration detector, a strange device with a glass needle and a button that, when pressed, makes a noise like a dying bird. They explain that spirits cause slight changes in atmospheric pressure, which this gadget can allegedly detect. You try not to mention that the Icelandic wind already does that, every 10 seconds. Here's your mainstream fact for the evening. British spiritualism peaked in the mid to late 1800s, heavily influenced by séances, table rapping, and the Fox sisters' claims in America. The movement emphasized structured rituals, moral improvement, and eventually, scientific inquiry. Historians still argue whether their scientific ghost tools were a sincere attempt at paranormal study, or just fancy props in the world's strangest theater production. The quirky detail? One of the LSSSP's devices, nicknamed the Ecto Fluctuator, was simply a goose feather mounted on a spring. When asked how it worked, the inventor replied, "It's mostly about feeling the moment." That night, you attend a joint séance between the Icelanders and their British guests. It's awkward. The Brits demand silence. The Icelanders hum quietly. The Brits take notes. The Icelanders mutter blessings. The table wobbles, probably because someone's knee hit it, and Reginald gasps, "Contact!" You lean closer. The table wobbles again. Reginald begins asking questions. "Is anyone there?" Wobble. "Are you at peace?" Wobble. "Do you enjoy British cuisine?" Silence. "Understandable," someone murmurs. The session ends in mild frustration and a great deal of overinterpretation. Mildred insists that the spirit silence was an act of protest. The Icelanders simply shrug and pass around the fermented shark. Later, you watch as the British team attempts to capture spectral energy in glass jars. They hold them open near cold spots, then quickly seal them, labeling each one with an ink pen and way too much confidence. You ask what they plan to do with the jars. "Store them, of course," says Mildred, "until the vibrations stabilize." You nod, because what else can you do? And then something happens. One of the LSSSP's thermometers shatters on the windowsill. No one touched it. No one even breathed near it. The temperature had dropped by over 10 degrees in a matter of seconds. Everyone stares at the tiny shards. Reginald begins to look. Excited, alarmed, possibly in love with the ghost. They rush outside, devices in hand. You follow, trudging into the snow. The air is sharp, still. And then, just past the fence, in the shadow of an abandoned stone hut, you see it. A flicker, not a shape, Not a face, just movement where there shouldn't be. You freeze. The wind doesn't blow. The snow doesn't fall. The British spiritualists huddle, scribbling notes, pointing gadgets, muttering excitedly. The Icelanders watch quietly, saying nothing. And you, well, you stand there wondering if that flicker was something real, or something you wanted to be real. Eventually, the moment passes, the flicker fades, the temperature rises. You all return to the inn, slightly unnerved, slightly electrified. That night, you can't sleep. The gadgets hum softly from the next room, like little mechanical lullabies or warnings. You roll over in bed, pull the blanket tighter and whisper, "Thanks for not being British." Something, somewhere, wobbles. The next morning, you wake to find a map tacked to the inn's common room wall, a handmade sprawl of parchment and ink, bordered with doodles of sheep and what might be angry clouds? No, wait. Those are supposed to be ghosts. Tiny ghosts, floating over turf houses. Christian from the Icelandic Ghost Club stands beside it proudly, tapping the map with a goose feather like a professor mid-lecture. "These," he says, "are Iceland's most haunted places, so far." You squint. The pins are all over the place, marked with symbols, dates, and occasional comments like, "Definitely weird," and "Avoid this house forever." Someone has drawn a frowning face near a fjord labeled "Unconfirmed Howling." Welcome to Iceland's first attempt at a ghost map. Christian explains, every time someone in the club encounters something spiritually ambiguous, they log the location, time, temperature, and emotional atmosphere, using what they refer to as the goose scale. Apparently, a level 1 goose indicates mild unease, while the level 5 goose means leave immediately and apologize on your way out. You're handed a copy. It's damp. Today's plan? Follow the trail to one of the most frequently pinned locations, an abandoned turf house in the hills outside Holar. Known locally as Reimar's End, it's become infamous for unexplained lights, phantom footsteps, and, allegedly, a singing ghost who only performs lullabies in Latin. You saddle up, Floki, now seasoned in nonsense, barely grunts, and ride out with a party of 4. 2 Icelanders, 1 highly enthusiastic British ghost hound named Basil, and yourself. Cold, skeptical, and mildly hopeful the ghost sings something catchy. The trek is beautiful and bleak. Rolling hills blanketed in frost, silence so deep it feels personal, and the distant, mournful call of something that might be a raven or might be regret in bird form. As you approach Reimar's End, the wind drops off. That's the first sign. The second is the air itself. It's wrong. Heavier, colder, like the kind of quiet you get when someone walks into the room and everyone pretends not to notice. You enter the turf house. It's sunken, moss-covered, and smells like damp linen and old potatoes. Inside, it's one cramped room with a collapsed ceiling and a single wooden stool that's somehow still standing. Christian lights a candle. Basil pulls out a thermal gauge, which looks suspiciously like a meat thermometer. You sit in the cold, you listen, you wait, and then, singing, soft, barely there, but unmistakably human and old. The melody winds through the air like breath across glass. A lullaby, you realize, not in Icelandic, not in English. It's Latin, or something pretending to be Latin, filtered through decades of decay. Everyone goes still. The candle flickers. The air feels charged, like the whole house is holding its breath. You glance at Basil. He's crying. You glance at Christian. He's scribbling in a notebook while whispering, "Goose level 4. Here's your mainstream fact for the notebook. Turf houses were the standard Icelandic dwelling for centuries, designed to hold heat and survive the brutal climate. Many ghost sightings occurred in or around them, partly because they were dark and creaky, but also because they symbolized generational memory. Historians still argue whether these hauntings were fueled by cultural trauma, architectural acoustics, or just the eerie psychology of low ceilings and drafty corners. Your fringe tidbit? A 19th century farmer claimed his turf house was haunted by a ghost who rearranged his spoons every night into the shape of a chicken. The farmer reportedly moved. The spoons, tragically, stayed behind. Back in Reimar's End, the singing stops, just gone, like someone closing a music box. Basil whispers, "Did anyone get that on wax cylinder?" No one answers. Christian pulls out a thermometer. It's dropped another 3 degrees. Then comes the real surprise. From the darkest corner of the room, where the shadows hang thickest, a sudden tap echoes. Not a creak, not the wind, a deliberate rhythmic tap. 3 times, you all freeze. A breeze slips through the cracks. The candle snuffs itself out. Basil breathes. Spectral interaction confirmed. Christian mutters, "Goose level 5. You exit slowly, quietly, as though trying not to wake someone. And in a way, maybe you are. Outside, the wind picks up again, as if it had been waiting politely. You look back once, just once, and for a moment you swear you see a pale face in the turf house doorway. But maybe it's moss, maybe it's memory. You all ride back in silence. At the inn that night, the ghost map gets another pin, this one right over Reimar's end. Someone draws musical notes beside it. Christian writes, sings in Latin, "May dislike fire." You sleep with your map under your pillow, just in case. You've now heard ghosts sing lullabies, break thermometers, and possibly rearrange cutlery into barnyard animals. You're not sure what's real anymore, but one thing's for sure. Ghosts love the coast, so it's only fitting that your next haunting takes place by the sea, where the wind never stops moaning and the fog rolls in like it's getting paid to. You're headed to a fishing village where the catch of the day might come with spectral commentary. Welcome to Siglufjordur, home of haunted boats, grumpy lighthouse keepers, and one very upset ghost who apparently hates herring. It starts, as all good maritime ghost stories do, with a man named Bensi who insists his boat is cursed. He says the fog follows him, that his nets tangle themselves, that the fish won't swim near him unless he apologizes aloud for a past transgression, which he refuses to explain. You meet him on the docks. He's missing 2 teeth, 4 buttons, and most of his patience. "It started last spring," he grumbles, pointing to a knuckle-shaped dent in the side of his rowboat. "Nothing touched the boat, nothing I could see." You're invited aboard for a short trip into the bay. The Ghost Club members are there, scribbling notes and fiddling with a jar labeled Ecto Breeze Sample Number 3. Basil, the overly keen Brit, is already seasick. You're clinging to the rail and wondering if ghost hunting should really involve this much sea spray. Out in the bay, the fog thickens like someone poured milk into the horizon. Visibility drops. The air smells of salt, kelp, and mild existential dread. Then Bensi stops rowing. "Listen," he says. You do. Nothing. And then something. A voice, thin, whistling, not from the boat, but around it, floating, whispering in and out of your ears like a song half remembered. Someone begins humming back. It's not clear if it's Basil or the wind pretending to be Basil. The ghostly voice doesn't sound angry, just exhausted, like a fisherman forced to file taxes. Here's your mainstream history fix. Iceland's fishing communities in the 19th century were isolated, tight-knit, and deeply superstitious. Sailors often performed rituals before going to sea. Whistling was forbidden, animals were omens, and certain cursed nets were burned without explanation. Many believe the spirits of those lost at sea lingered in the fog. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were protective folklore or legitimate supernatural encounters preserved through oral tradition. And for the fringe tidbit, one lighthouse keeper in 1879 claimed he received nightly Morse code from the dead. When asked to explain, he simply said, "They're very bad at spelling." You drift nearer to the lighthouse. It rises out of the mist like a giant finger warning you to turn back. You don't. The lighthouse itself is abandoned now, replaced by a newer, less atmospheric structure further up the coast. But this one has stories. Voices in the stairwell, footsteps when no one's there, and the infamous herring ghost, said to appear only when the fish harvest is poor. Locals swear they've heard angry muttering near the base, followed by the overwhelming scent of spoiled fish. Once, someone left an offering of pickled herring in a tin dish. The next day, the dish was gone, but the words "try harder" were scratched into the door in perfect cursive. You dock below the lighthouse just as the sun considers setting. Christian insists on climbing up. You follow, every step echoing on the iron spiral staircase. At the top, the view is, well, fog, but also something else. Movement. Below, on the rocks, you see a figure, just standing, facing the sea, not moving, not reacting, not normal. You blink, gone. Of course, you descend in eerie silence. Basil has stopped writing. Bensi refuses to speak. Back in the village, the innkeeper offers you a bed and a warning. Don't talk to the waves, they answer. You try not to think about what they might say. That night, the fog curls around the windows like a curious cat. You wake once, around 3 a.m., to a creaking sound outside. You look, just the ocean, just the boat, just wait. The pickled herring dish is back, empty. The words, not funny, are scratched into the wood below it. You go back to bed. You don't sleep. By now, you've learned that Icelandic ghosts are oddly specific. Some wail, some hum, some just really hate your dinner. But nothing, not the goat apparitions, not the Latin lullabies, not even Basil's enthusiastic gagging at sea can prepare you for tonight's haunting. Because this one involves a toilet, more specifically, a haunted outhouse. You arrive in a village that barely qualifies as one. 3 homes, 1 sheep pen, and a general store that sells both licorice and fishing hooks in the same bowl. The mayor, who also happens to be the baker, constable, and head of the knitting circle, greets you with a frown and a handshake like a raw loaf of bread. I'm a skeptic, he says flatly, but I don't mess with the outhouse. You pause. He nods seriously. That thing groans. It's not plumbing. Naturally, this is exactly the kind of situation the Isafjordur Ghost Club dreams about. Christian is already unpacking gear. Basil has donned a scarf embroidered with tiny ghosts. You have questions, but no one is in the mood for jokes. Turns out, the haunting started 6 weeks ago. Locals reported strange noises at night, heavy sighs, muttered complaints, and, on one particularly memorable occasion, what sounded like Gregorian chanting followed by a fart. No one will admit to hearing it directly, but everyone knows someone who did. And the real kicker, people have reported cold spots inside the outhouse. In Iceland, in January, you approach the structure slowly. It's made of old driftwood and hopelessness. The door creaks open with a groan that sounds suspiciously human. You shine a lantern inside. Nothing, just the standard wooden bench with a hole and a faint smell of doom. Christian places a candle on the bench. Basil begins taking readings with a compass that spins like it's being paid to panic. You stand guard outside, where the wind howls with gusto and every creak makes you flinch. Then, from within, a groan, not the wind, not the structure, a long, disapproving ugh. You freeze. Basil freezes. Even the wind takes a polite pause. And then, silence. Here's your historical anchor. In the 9th century, Icelandic villages often treated outhouses and latrines with a mix of practicality and superstition. It was believed that disrespecting these humble spaces, building too close to elf paths, failing to bless the wood, or using unclean language, could invite unwanted attention. Historians still argue whether these tales were cautionary folklore meant to encourage hygiene, or legitimate ghost lore handed down through generations of drafty, toilet-adjacent trauma. Your fringe fact? In 1883, one Icelandic farmer swore his outhouse was haunted by the ghost of a tax assessor. The ghost apparently refused to move on until the farmer finally filed a land survey, with accurate measurements. Back in the village, a crowd of 4 has gathered. Well, 3 villagers and a goat with emotional damage. The mayor stands beside you, arms crossed. I went in there once, he mutters, heard my mother's voice. You ask, was she still alive at the time? She was in Denmark. He doesn't elaborate. The ghost club decides on a bold plan, conduct a mini séance inside the outhouse. Christian lights 2 candles. Basil enters, clutching a bell and whispering protection phrases that sound suspiciously like British tea orders. You and the mayor stand a safe 5 feet back. Very safe. Inside, Basil begins to hum. The candles flicker. The door creaks shut. A pause. Then, slam. The door flies open. Basil stumbles out, eyes wide, scarf askew. It laughed. You believe him. You shouldn't, but you do. Christian carefully peers inside. Nothing. Just a snuffed candle, an overturned bell, and a scent that is definitely not all natural. Basil insists on adding the event to the ghost map under paranormal bathroom disruptions. Christian agrees. Goose level 3. It didn't throw anything, he explains, but it commented. That's rare. The mayor grumbles something about getting a new outhouse, or moving, or maybe both. That night, you're offered a bed in the mayor's home. It's cozy, warm, and located as far from the outhouse as geographically possible within village limits. You drift off to sleep, lulled by the creaking timbers and distant wind. Then, around midnight, you wake. Not from a sound, but a feeling. A vague, insistent sensation. Not dread, not fear, just the unmistakable realization. You need to pee, and the only bathroom is outside, waiting. You lie there in the dark, battling two equally terrifying forces, the growing pressure in your bladder and the memory of a haunted outhouse that laughed. Every floorboard creaks like it's daring you to move. The wind whispers ancient Icelandic threats. Somewhere, a door moans just a little too dramatically. Eventually, biology wins. You wrap yourself in every available blanket, scarf, and shred of personal dignity and step out into the night. The snow crunches underfoot. The air is sharp, cold, and vaguely judgmental. You avoid the outhouse, obviously. Instead, you venture toward a secluded rock behind the goat shed, whispering apologies to the spirits and also the goats. It's not glamorous, it's not proud, but it's safe. Maybe. Back in the mayor's house, Christian is already up, scribbling notes by candlelight. Big night tomorrow, he murmurs, sliding a teacup your way. The séance. You stare at him, blinking sleep from your eyes. What séance? He smiles gently. The one that went wrong. Oh, good. The next evening, you're invited, told, to join the ghost club for a dramatic reenactment. This isn't your usual candle and humming affair. No, this is the séance, the one they don't like to talk about in public, the one that reportedly ended in someone fainting, someone shouting in Latin, and one chair catching fire. Did the chair spontaneously combust, you ask? No, Christian admits, but it tipped over very quickly, and then someone kicked a lantern. Fair enough. You arrive at the séance house, a creaky old farmstead, abandoned since 1871, after its owner swore the walls whispered his name every full moon. The door groans open like it's been practicing for this moment. Inside, the room is dim, cold, and smells faintly of panic. 6 of you sit around a large table. Basil is there, face solemn, monocle fogged. So is the skeptical mayor. Just to observe, he insists. And the widow who once claimed her second husband still visits to rearrange her cutlery. You try not to sit too close to anyone with unfinished emotional business. The candles are lit, the windows are shut. The wind is, suspiciously, completely silent. Christian begins the ritual. He calls for stillness, focus. He invites the spirits kindly, respectfully, like someone hoping not to be sued. Everyone closes their eyes. Then, from nowhere, thump. The room jolts. A chair skitters a few inches. Basil gasps. I felt a hand, he whispers. Cold. British. Christian keeps going. He's in the zone now, quoting poetry, slipping between Icelandic and Old Norse. One candle flickers blue. The mayor mutters, "That's not normal." Then the widow starts shaking. Not violently, just enough that everyone else starts pretending not to notice. Her voice changes, soft, deep, strange. "She's here," the widow murmurs. "She wants the keys." Everyone freezes. You lean over to Christian. "What keys?" He shrugs. "There are always keys." The temperature plummets. Your breath fogs. One of the candle flames inverts. Yes, inverts. And Basil lets out a very unmanly yelp. The table knocks again. The wind returns in a sudden, forceful gust, and then the front door bursts open. Everyone screams, except the goat. Because yes, a goat walks in, just stands there, silent, regal, judging. The widow faints. Basil drops his thermometer. The mayor leaps to his feet shouting, "Not again!" The goat bleats once, turns around, and walks out the way it came. You sit in stunned silence, candle wax dripping onto your boot, wondering whether you've just seen a divine omen or the universe's most awkward comic relief. Here's your historical anchor. Séances in the 19th century, even in deeply Christian countries like Iceland, were surprisingly common. They weren't always dark or frightening. Many were social events, a blend of grieving, curiosity, and performance. But now and then, something unexplainable happened. Historians still argue whether these moments were group hysteria, tricks of the light, or, well, real. In your fringe detail? In 1892, an Icelandic séance was interrupted by a raven flying through the window and refusing to leave for 3 hours. The attendees declared it a spirit named Björg. The raven was later seen stealing wool socks from nearby washing lines. Back at the séance house, Christian declares the evening a success. Minimal fire, good energy, high goose level, maybe 4.5. Basil disagrees. It was chaotic, and that goat knew things. Everyone agrees, not to mention the goat in the final report. As you walk back to town, the widow, now awake and sipping something herbal, thanks you for your courage. You want to say you were brave, but you're still thinking about the keys, and the goat, and whether you should maybe sleep with your boots on tonight. By this point, you've wandered through fog-choked fishing villages, trembled in turf houses, politely avoided haunted bathrooms, and been judged by at least one psychic goat. You've seen things, felt things, that defy simple explanation, but what comes next? That's the twist no one expected. A courtroom full of ghosts. Well, not full of ghosts, but full of people talking about ghosts very seriously, which in some ways is even more unnerving. You're back in Reykjavik now, thawing slowly in a modest courthouse where the benches creak, the judge scowls, and the radiator wheezes like it's on its final breath. Word has spread that today's trial is unusual, which, in a country where someone once sued their neighbor for winking too ominously, is saying something. Here's the case. A man, Peitur, has accused his neighbor Svala of fraud and emotional distress, claiming she staged a haunting to scare him off his property. Svala insists the ghost is real. Peitur insists she used bells, fish sauce, and unsettling poetry to fake the entire thing. The court is trying to stay awake. You sit in the back, wrapped in your coat, sipping lukewarm coffee and quietly marveling that this is actually happening. The judge, an older gentleman with the face of someone who's had too many conversations about ghosts and not enough about pensions, rubs his forehead and sighs. Let us proceed. Svala takes the stand first. She wears an oversized shawl and a glare that could curdle milk. The spirit is named Arni, she explains. He lives in the pantry. He doesn't like men who interrupt him. You scribble that down, because how could you not? She describes how Arni slams cupboard doors, moans dramatically around dinner time, and once rearranged her spice rack alphabetically, except for the time. He has a temper, she explains, but excellent taste. Peitur counters with accusations of trickery. He claims to have found fishing line tied to a ladle, a wind-up bell hidden in the rafters, and several suspiciously poetic threats scrawled on parchment. No ghost talks about taxes and regrets, he argues. That's just her. The courtroom murmurs. The judge sighs again, longer this time. Then Christian, Ghost Club president, is called as a cultural advisor. He strides up like a professor of nonsense and solemnly explains Iceland's long tradition of spectral justice. Revenants, he says, have been involved in land disputes for centuries. He produces a booklet titled Specters and Settlements, a legal companion. The judge does not look amused. Here's your mainstream historical takeaway. In Iceland, traditional ghost stories often involved boundary disputes, family curses, and unfinished business, all of which conveniently match the legal squabbles of the living. In some rural areas, it wasn't unheard of for hauntings to be mentioned in land conflicts. Historians still argue whether this was metaphor, superstition, or a clever way of gaining leverage in court. And now for your fringe tidbit. In 1875, an Icelandic woman tried to sue a ghost for property damage after her walls began bleeding cod liver oil. The judge dismissed the case, noting that the oil was likely already there. Back in the present courtroom, things are escalating. Svala presents a jar. "This," she says, holding it high, "contains Arnie's breath." The judge closes his eyes. Pater sputters. The bailiff tries not to laugh. Someone coughs and mutters as goose level 1. The jar, by the way, smells like pickled onions and regret. Eventually, the judge makes his ruling. There is insufficient evidence of supernatural involvement. However, both parties are advised to cease ritual taunting in pillow-based exorcisms. Svala is told to stop writing threatening haikus. Pater is told to apologize for the time he called Arnie a pantry squatter. The case is dismissed. The courtroom empties. You step outside into the cold Reykjavik dusk, trying to process what just happened. Was it justice? Was it performance art? Was it both? Christian claps you on the back. "You see now," he says, "ghosts aren't just spirits. They're context." You nod as though this is profound. It kind of is. Or maybe your brain is just frozen. That evening, back at the tea parlor, Basil delivers a passionate retelling of the courtroom drama to a half-dozing audience. "They didn't see the ghost," he says, "but they felt him, in the spice rack." The widow nods. "I knew a spirit who hated cinnamon." You sip your tea. You wonder if Arnie is listening. If maybe he's still in that pantry, still watching, still judging the placement of herbs and the men who interrupt him. You whisper to your teacup, "Don't worry, Arnie, time is hard." The spoon stirs itself. Probably the wind. Probably. If you've learned anything by now, it's that ghosts in Iceland don't just linger. They participate. They judge your seasoning. They rearrange your life. And occasionally they file grievances in court. So when Christian says, "Tonight's the big one," you don't even flinch. You just nod, finish your tea, and start layering up. Tonight, you're going graveyard side. It's the final hunt. A midnight séance in one of Iceland's oldest churchyards, the kind of place where even the moss seems haunted, where gravestones lean like they're eavesdropping, where the wind doesn't whistle, it recites. You hike out with the ghost club, your breath fogging like incense offerings to the void. The air is sharp, the sky is wide, and the snow crunches under your boots like you're walking across old secrets. The church is long abandoned. A sagging structure with warped doors, boarded windows, and a bell tower that leans just enough to make you nervous. The graveyard behind it is fenced in by rusted iron and good intentions. Inside, crooked stones, tangled weeds, and a hush that swallows footsteps. "This is where we try for full contact," Christian says softly. "You don't ask what that means. You've learned." The séance begins at midnight. The group gathers in a circle, surrounded by gravestones and flickering lanterns. There's Basil, of course, wrapped in 3 scarves and muttering nervously. The widow, her hair braided with red thread, for protection. And a newcomer, a teenage boy who claims to have dreams about dead fishermen whispering secrets through storm clouds. Sounds about right. Christian begins with an invocation. Not shouted, not chanted, just spoken gently to the stones and whatever might be listening beneath them. "We come with questions, we come with care, we come with mittens." A pause, then silence. Then, thud. Somewhere behind you, a single stone shifts. Not much, just enough. You don't turn around. Not yet. Then comes the breeze. But it's not cold. Not quite. It moves through the circle like a sigh. One of the lanterns flickers violently and extinguishes. Basil gasps. The boy whispers, "He's close." And that's when the poem starts. No one speaks it, but everyone hears it. A low, rhythmic verse, ancient, lyrical, impossible to place. It doesn't come from any one direction. It comes from around, like the wind decided to get literary. The poem ends. The silence returns. Then a light, soft, blue, faint, hovering just above the snow, between 2 graves marked only by worn initials. The light doesn't pulse, doesn't move, just exists. Someone begins to cry. Quietly. Not fear, something else. Recognition, maybe. Christian kneels, places a candle on the ground. The light above it doesn't waver. Then, slowly, gently, it fades, not vanishes, just dims into nothing. No one speaks for a long time. Eventually, the group breaks the circle. The lanterns are relit. You walk quietly among the gravestones, processing what you saw, or think you saw, or felt. Here's your mainstream history moment. Many Icelandic graveyards were small, remote, and maintained by families for generations. It wasn't uncommon for loved ones to visit at night, bringing stories, offerings, or simply company. Graveyards weren't always places of fear. They were places of continued conversation. Historians still argue whether these traditions were acts of remembrance, spiritual practice, or a little of both. Now for your fringe fact. In 1888, a man named Einar claimed to have met the spirit of his grandmother in a graveyard. She reportedly asked him to bury her knitting needles with her, as they made the afterlife itchy. He complied. The hauntings stopped. You leave the churchyard just before dawn. The sky is beginning to shift from black to bruised blue. The cold is softer now, less biting, like something has eased. Back at the inn, no one speaks much. Basil writes. The widow hums. The boy draws a picture of a lantern with wings. Christian tacks a new mark on the ghost map. Light seen, verse heard, peaceful presence, goose level, serene. That night you sleep deeply, dreamlessly, like someone whispered a lullaby just for you. The final morning greets you like an old friend with cold hands, gentle, quiet, and a little reluctant to say goodbye. The streets of Reykjavik are muffled in snow, rooftops dusted like forgotten pastries, and chimney smoke curls lazily into the pale sky. You step outside the inn, the bell above the door giving one last creaky farewell. Your time among the Icelandic ghost hunters is coming to an end. But first, there's one more stop. Christian insists on taking you to the Skugaheimer archives, a shady, crooked room in the back of the local library, filled with handwritten ghost reports, faded maps, strange drawings, and one taxidermy puffin that may or may not be cursed. You spend hours flipping through records, scrawled notes about flickering lanterns, goats with unsettling eye contact, children claiming their dolls woke up, and one entry that simply reads, "Don't ask the well anything." You don't. Christian sighs happily. It's all part of the story, he says, even the ones we can't explain. Especially the ones we can't explain. You leave the archives with a folder full of sketches, a mug shaped like a skull, gifted by Basil, who insists it helps with spiritual grounding, and a growing feeling that something in you has shifted. Not a big dramatic haunting, just a quiet sense that the world is larger and weirder than it pretends to be. You meet up with the others one last time. There's no ceremony, no farewell ritual, just shared tea, some frostbitten laughter, and Christian handing you an updated ghost map. You're part of the club now, he says. The map has a new mark near the coast, added just this morning. A tiny doodle of a herring. Beside it, in delicate script, still watching. You don't ask. Instead, you take one final walk through the city, past the tea house where it all began, past the court where ghosts were discussed in legal terms, past the outhouse you will never, ever speak of again. You walk to the harbor and watch the sea breathe in and out, slow and vast. You think about all the whispers in the wind, the lights that didn't flicker quite right, the dreams that lingered too long. You think about goats and gravestones and the ghost who alphabetized a spice rack. Did Iceland believe? Yes, in its way. Not always in floating sheets or chains or groans in the night, but in something more peculiar, more human. A belief that stories matter, that memory lingers, that emotion sticks to the walls like soot and smoke, and occasionally leaves a footprint in the snow. You smile, because isn't that a kind of haunting too? You turn back. The wind pushes gently at your back like it's helping you leave, or just making sure you know it's still there, just in case. Now, wherever you are, in bed, in a quiet room, or somewhere safe beneath a soft blanket, let this moment begin to settle. You've traveled far through snow-covered hills, along the edge of haunted harbors, into forgotten turf houses where time hangs like dust in the air. You've heard ghost stories whispered over candlelight, and you felt the soft hush of something watching, something old, quiet, and maybe a little lonely. Let those memories fade now. The cold air of Iceland is behind you. The wind has quieted. The flickering candles have all gone out, one by one, gently, like stars blinking into sleep. The ghost map rests folded in your mind, its little pins tucked neatly away, the stories they tell wrapped in stillness. Your breath is slow now. The night stretches, safe and calm. No footsteps in the hallway, no whispered names on the breeze. Just the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat, soft and warm beneath the covers. And if there is a ghost nearby, one of those gentle ones, the ones who watch but never linger, know that they're just passing through, curious, kind, maybe even protective. Sleep comes easy now. Let it. Let the stories fold into dreams and the dreams settle into peace. The ghosts will wait. They always do.